Diversity TV. I'm Ava Colby, a writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. My Facebook and website are Ava Colby Books. Today I'm going to talk about this book, Freeing Energy by Bill Nussey. This book is one that I have on Kindle, on my phone. Books on my phone is my new favorite thing. I found this book when I was looking for an update on the state of renewable technology and the renewables industry. If you caught the first season of the book show, you would have noticed one episode when I talk about several different books about the energy industry and the history of how energy keeps changing and advancing human civilization. This related to, of course, my MBA program. I wanted to know what innovations had been made since then, which would be since 2018-19 when I was reading up on it. And there have been some incredible ones which he gets into in this book. Why I like this book: it is very accessibly written. It is not too technical for someone outside of science, technology, and renewables to understand, and it is all about working hard and being hopeful for a better future for humanity. A limitation of this book is that honestly I couldn't say because I don't have any degrees in science, so for me it would be hard to independently verify some of the content in this book. Now, in my work as a teacher, I am always saying that the most important thing is essential skills. Reading, writing, and texting is not reading and writing. It does not count as literacy. Math, at least for the 6th grade. We all use those basic maths throughout our lives to calculate discounts at the grocery store, which credit cards have the best rates, and so on and so forth, and critical thinking with debate and discourse. Now, many people don't count critical thinking as an essential skill, and those people are wrong. The single most important thing for you to ever learn, besides the basic principle of treat others how you want to be treated, is critical thinking. How to form your own opinion and how to explain why you think the way that you think. So now I shall get into some critical thinking and discourse, what this book makes me think. This obviously relates to our current debates about renewable technologies and the environment and pollution. The author of this book states that he won't spend time discussing ideas about climate change and overall global warming due to human activities because it is so controversial that people will just sit around arguing about that to the point where it will distract from his main point, which is to talk about the growing renewables technology industry and all the opportunities that there are there for entrepreneurs to make a lot of money on this developing industry. So instead, he focuses on facts no one can argue about, such as that oil is a limited resource. We are going to run out of it, and energy sources such as solar, wind, and tidal power, among others, are unlimited. He also prefers to focus on opportunities in the renewables industry for entrepreneurs and stay positive in that way, rather than get into arguments with people and be political or dogmatic about his views. One of the inventors he mentions is, of course, Elon Musk, founder and CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. And in a rare show of both professionalism and adult maturity for adults today, he acknowledges that Mr. Musk is an eccentric and at times controversial public figure, but he says he's only going to focus on Mr. Musk in relation to the Tesla company and renewables. He does not give into the disgusting negativity of gossip. I very much appreciate that. And and a lot of times it seems like you just don't see that with adults today, showing that maturity. I have worked in a high school and seen colleagues gossip more than a lot of our students, so I really appreciate this. This book made me think about how little the environmental movement and its charities, nonprofits, and activists have actually done for us, and how much captains of industry have done for us. In fact, throughout history, captains of industry and inventors, largely interested not just in progress, but in the money and fame their work could bring them, have led us to innovations that have improved human lives and human civilization. Innovative entrepreneurs and inventors such as John Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Wilbur and Orville Wright have helped to advance society greatly. Without these men's amazing contributions to society, perhaps most of us would still be in fields working, farming, and have little knowledge of the world outside our small area of it. Without businessmen like Rockefeller as well, the U.S. economy would not be the powerhouse that it is today, something that all U.S. citizens and residents are benefiting from even today. The strange thing is that society tends to vilify these men later after we've benefited from them and their hard work and success. Rockefeller helped make the U.S. economy what it is, and after he became the richest man in the world financially, he became an incredible philanthropist. Among his many charities was the founding of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Lara Spelman Rockefeller Memorial in memory of his wife, and the General Education Board, which was charged with improving education in the U.S. without distinction of race, sex, or creed. Rockefeller had a devout Christian mother, and he refused to publicize his charitable works. It would be wrong for a Christian to do that. So the general public tended to not know about his philanthropy. He was a ruthless businessman, but he was also a philanthropist, yet he is generally remembered only for his ruthless business practices, even though, again, our economy that we still benefit from today is partly built on his work and then similar to him. The people responsible for creating what we call modernization are not the ones that identify as charitable activists. And the ones that will solve the problems of our dependence on non-renewable energy sources will not be the people working in self-identified environmental nonprofits wearing hemp suits, because they are not the ones who will invent the new clean technologies, nor the ones that will be in a position to change policy. I used to volunteer for some different charities and nonprofits, or sometimes pick up some extra work with them. When I was finally able to go to college, I just assumed I'd work for a nonprofit after I graduated, especially since originally I didn't think I'd be able to basically be smart enough to figure out English grammar well enough to teach it, to be an English language teacher like I wanted. The research I did into these charities and nonprofits when I was in college is why I did not. It is all very corrupt, unfortunately. If you want to know more about that, probably the quickest and easiest way is to watch the documentary Cowspiracy, The Sustainability Secret. Filmmaker Kip Anderson, who is basically a devout environmentalist, delves into the corruption and intentional limitations of many environmental nonprofits. I have personally found environmental groups to be incredibly limited in their thinking and ineffective in their actions, and at this point I have almost no respect for any of them. And I tend not to believe and support them, even though I believe and support generally the same ideas they do, like pursuing this renewable technology, not cutting down all the forests and continuing to pollute our environment. But I don't respect them because of all the things I found out about them when I was researching them. So like the author of Freeing Energy, I'm not even going to bother arguing about carbon being released into the atmosphere and humans causing climate change and general, on average, warming. People want to argue too much. What people can't argue about is facts, such as how the use of burning coal pollutes the breathable air, partly by releasing heavy metals into the air. People can't argue about gas-burning vehicles contributing to smog in places like Los Angeles. And when California changed the rules related to car emissions, the air became much cleaner in Los Angeles, although it still has smog and the air quality is still bad. That's why on the West Coast we have the expression coughing up California, after someone's been down in California for a while and they come back up to somewhere like Oregon. With facts like that, it can't really be denied that we need cleaner sources of energy. We are polluting the environment, we are going to run out of oil, so on and so forth. However, environmental groups aren't who's getting us there. Business and technology leaders are. Well-intentioned people keep throwing money at self-branded environmental groups, thinking that's going to save the future, yet I have rarely seen these groups produce an actual result. Further, these are the same people who chose Al Gore as their spokesperson, a man with no substantial scientific training whose famous work and Inconvenient Truth has been picked apart for scientific inaccuracies theses by experts, all of whom I read were not actually impressed with the work. And since then, this movement has chosen a teenager from Sweden with 0 degrees in science or technology and no job experience as their spokesperson. Miss Greta Thunberg began protesting a lack of government initiative on climate change in 2018 at age 15. I always found this strange. Her movement started by not going to school and encouraging other young people, and eventually their teachers as well, not to go to school and protest. First, this sounded to me like a great excuse for them to just not go to school and for some adults to not have to go to work. But this is highly illogical, given that if we are going to overcome our dependence on these dirty sources of energy, we need for people to go to school, get degrees in science, and create new clean technologies. Dropping out of high school and not going to work is not going to get us towards these new technologies that we need to have developed. I personally have nothing against the young lady herself. I don't personally care about her or Al Gore for that matter one way or another. I'm merely analyzing the facts that I see in front of me. And I am seeing a very ineffective environmental movement, which I consider very problematic because I very much believe in reducing environmental pollution. Ms. Thunberg and her supporters frequently demonstrate frankly, their ignorance and their total lack of in-depth thinking on the issues of sustainability. And that is very typical in the nonprofit sector. It is a lot of slogans, but a lot of empty promises and gestures. For example, in 2019, she supposedly took this 0 carbon emission boat or ship ride. There's no such thing as 0 carbon. We are not 0 carbon. All mammals eat food and emit a certain amount of methane gas, for example. Further, your food was shipped or trucked in from somewhere, besides that when it was farmed, they were using fertilizer, and that pollutes the environment. And the trucks or ships that the food was shipped in on, though it was carbon intensive to create those materials, you have to mine the metals out to begin with. The metal parts on a ship or a bicycle are gotten by mining. So boats and bicycles are not 0 carbon. Further, those materials had to be shipped somewhere, then smelted and molded into what they needed to be, shipped somewhere else. Plastics and rubber materials are added to these things. The wood on her ship, those started out as trees. They were cut down. Carbon was released when they were cut down. Those trees were then shipped somewhere to turn them into the wood for the boat or ship that she took. And the technology used for all that, for cutting down the trees, for shipping the trees to someplace, that was probably run on gasoline. So that was not 0 carbon. Nothing we do is 0 carbon. So this was a nifty publicity stunt, but besides that, it wasn't really 0 carbon. If you actually stop and think through this, it was not 0 carbon. And then what was her actual point and the environmental movement's actual point with it? That one environmental spokesperson took a low carbon boat ride. Has nothing whatsoever to do with shipping food, medical supplies, or various products over long distances. Her taking one low carbon boat ride had no effect on the carbon needs of trucking and shipping large amounts of food and medical supplies nationally and internationally, which is a big part of what the entire global economy is based on. Comparative advantage does not work without international trade, and international trade doesn't work without shipping. It was frankly an empty and pointless publicity stunt that in no way addressed the carbon-heavy energy needs of industrial trucking and shipping, which are necessary to maintain our modern way of life and help developing nations modernize, which is arguably something that all people deserve to do. Additionally, she often takes trains. Trains are not anywhere near 0 carbon. Again, they are made of metal. Think mining and then trucking those supplies, those metals that you mined out of the earth to a place where they will be smelted down. There's fuel to run the materials that do the mining, and then they're taken to the industrial plant where they're made into the metal forms that are needed to make the parts for the trains. She is against flying in planes. It looks like she would love it if everyone stopped taking planes anywhere, regardless of the effect this might have on the global economy. She just says, oh, the pollution. What about the global economy? She seems to be completely unaware of the global economy. These actions are frankly as impotent as most actions taken by the environmental movement. They are empty, pompous gestures that do not solve our energy-related pollution problems. Because we're not talking about where we're going to get energy on a massive industrial scale worldwide to replace these dirty energies that we're using to mine, to truck, to ship internationally. So here I'd like to pause so we don't get into some of the very mean-spirited personal criticisms some people have of her. Those that don't like her really make it too personal, in my opinion, and really get into nasty insults that do not need to be there. If she is considered somewhat on the spectrum, that doesn't make her not worth listening to in and of itself. The fact that she doesn't have an awareness of things like technologies, the massive amount of energies our current society runs on, international trade and economics, now that's something to criticize. If she's considered a little different, that is not something I consider anything that needs to be attacked, and that is vicious, and I consider it not a mature way to handle anything. Now, in April 2020, she donated $100,000 of charitable prize money she received to UNICEF to help children have necessities like soap during the COVID-19 pandemic, and she spoke up about vaccine accessibility inequality. I think that's fantastic. I've heard arguments for and against an admittedly rushed vaccine. I'm not going to get into that controversy, but I will say if somebody wanted that vaccine to protect themselves, I think they had a right to have it, especially given the circumstances we were all under. And she did verbally speak up about that. Though, again, I don't think any action was actually taken, just talk. Actions like her donating that money show that she is capable of some awareness of other social issues and genuine concern for others and their suffering. And she was right during the pandemic to point out that governments can take quick and massive actions to address problems when they want to. Though I must say, a lot of us would love to have $100,000 just given to us and that we could just afford to give away. Billions of us work for a living at regular jobs and will never see that much money in our hands in our lifetimes. She really does lead a charmed life. It reminds me that she more or less bullied her own mother into giving up her international career as an opera singer. And because she was insisting her family not take airplanes anymore. It must be nice to have one parent in the family be able to support everyone. Millions of families do not have that option. Further, this demonstrates a family dynamic where the child has the power to bully the parents into submission, rather than what would be considered a more correct dynamic where the parents, who are older, wiser, and more experienced, make the rules and the child has to follow them until they reach adulthood, a status which is earned over time and not given. Further, it is a very anti-feminist action to bully a woman into giving up her career and leaving her and you totally financially dependent on a man. This actually reminds me of posters I saw in Ireland stating that many parents there are feeling bullied by their teenagers, don't feel safe at home, and it's becoming an increasingly common problem in Ireland, which coincides with when they stopped allowing any form of physical discipline. The youth in Ireland, the UK, and much of the US, they act up in public all the time. They act crazy and out of control. And usually if you see parents trying to do anything, they're trying to placate them rather than take charge of the situation like a real adult. They just plead with them. And that's not the correct way to be teaching people how to behave in public, because we live in a society where other people exist. And we have to learn to have that awareness and consideration of others. Here in the south of the US, where some limited physical discipline is allowed, like mild spanking, you just don't see kids act up in public, almost ever. And you don't see that in France either, because parents will not tolerate it. They shut it down immediately, and that is one of the reasons visiting Paris is such an absolute pleasure. Speaking of which, I find it odd she's been compared to Joan of Arc, I assume by the adults around her, acting as this public speaker's career manager. Why I find it odd is that Joan of Arc actually went into real physical battles where she could have been raped and killed by British soldiers. She joined the French army at 16, roughly, and inspired troops in the Battle of Orleans, an actual physical battle with an actual physical result. Ms. Thunberg talks in public, and in 4 years, no government, charity, NGO, or other organization has changed a single policy based on her work as a public speaker, unless I've missed something. She has not faced rape or being killed and has produced no actual physical result. She is not risking being captured by an army, imprisoned, tortured, put on trial, and burned alive at the stake. Thus, I actually find this comparison completely illogical and foundationless, but like the non-zero carbon boat ride, it's good for publicity. For angry and passionate complaints about the status quo, I am actually often quite sympathetic to. I like that she calls governments out on their empty and meaningless promises and carbon meetings. Many politicians will say things like, we will reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2050, and then make no actual plan for how their country is going to do that, just so they can look like the environmentally conscious candidate, and she is never fooled by their empty rhetoric. She's completely right that politicians will never take any real meaningful action about environmental pollution unless the public puts massive pressure on them. However, she misses the key point that this pressure needs to be for something specific and not just a general vague action on environmental pollution. These politicians would need to start breaking down their idea into actual practical steps. For example, we will reduce carbon emissions by doing X, Y, and Z, which we have already put together a think tank to work out what actual physical steps we will be taking in the next year to start. For example, reducing car use by having better public transportation so people will take it instead of driving, thus reducing emissions, or by the government subsidizing retrofitting people's current gas-driven cars to be hybrids. They never have a buy. Of course, with that second idea, you also need to look at what powers the grid those cars are charged on. That is something he gets you to think about in his book. This would make for a more specific goal, and it may be necessary. Think about how many millions of automobiles there are out there, and the fact that millions of people live in poverty, and they need their vehicles to get to their jobs, to get their kids to school. Many people live in places where bus services do not run. It is not practical or realistic to expect everyone to run out and buy an electric vehicle. And think about the carbon footprint involved in manufacturing a new vehicle. How much more of a carbon footprint is there if you encourage essentially throwing away millions of vehicles versus, for example, adding solar panels to the roofs and running them all partially on solar energy as part of a longer-term plan to phase out gasoline? He doesn't talk about this exact way of using technology in his book, but his book does get you thinking along those terms of what other ideas are out there instead of just maintaining the status quo. So if everyone had the money and the will to go out and buy all electric vehicles or retrofit their current vehicles to be hybrid, though we need to think about, if they began charging on our current energy grids, it would crash the current energy grids because of how much more power would be needed. The current energy grids around the world would need more power, and often these grids are powered by coal burning stations and other dirty and non-renewable energy sources. Thus, your electric vehicle may really be running on coal. What powers your electrical grid to put the electricity in that car that's not burning gasoline? You need to look at what powers it. These are facts and details that environmental groups do not focus on. They seem to lack this real awareness of energy infrastructures and how they work. They just write these empty campaign slogans. These are facts that I'm talking about, and environmental movements and politicians alike rarely like to discuss actual facts and get down to the nitty-gritty on this. Another aspect of Ms. Thunberg's career is her general tendency to spew vitriolic hate speech towards her elders. I can understand and appreciate her generation's anger towards inheriting a very damaged world. However, they all seem to think this is a new frustration. This is actually something every new generation experiences. And since she has never taken any practical steps grounded in facts in the real world, such as changing specific laws and government regulations and policies, she actually has no clue how hard it is in practical terms to change things for the better. She is not a policy analyst. She does not know how to come up with an actual plan for governments to take action. She just tells other people to take action. This is also, to a certain extent, extremely nonsensical thinking. Every generation does the best it can within the limitations of its understanding and abilities at that time. It's up to each new generation to do better. This is the basic relationship of parents and children. Your parents aren't and weren't perfect. At some point you grow up, you realize this, you have enough maturity to, hopefully, to appreciate the good things they did for you, see and understand their limitations, and you move on and you forgive them any sort of little mistakes they made along the way. You forgive it, you let it go, as much for your own good as for theirs. There's no reason to be hateful towards them for not being perfect, your parents or the older generation in general. I want to see us terminate our dependence on dirty energy sources and follow through with what Bill Nussey talks about in this book, bringing modern power for cooking, lighting, and so on to everyone, including the roughly 770 million people today who do not live with basic electricity in their homes, the majority of them, 580 million, in rural parts of the African continent. The way to do this is through people staying in school, getting degrees in science, industry, business, and governmental policies, public policies, and inventing and selling new innovative technologies and changing the laws to support these innovations that can make this happen. Not making vague general pronouncements about how people, other than ourselves, need to take some kind of general action for the environment. We need people getting degrees that help them pursue policies so they can get into positions of power to help their larger community and change corrupt laws that allow massive amounts of pollution to continue, instead of doing like most people in positions of power and squandering it for selfish purposes that rob their larger community. For politicians and environmental activists, the answer is to have goals that are specific, realistic, achievable, and time-based, has a specific deadline, and the deadline is based on facts. I once did some work in Portland, Oregon, canvassing door-to-door to get financial donations to a nonprofit to try to pass a law and to get signatures to try to pass a law in Multnomah County to ban plastic bags in stores. This goal was specific. It was realistic, it was achievable, and it was time-based, trying to get enough signatures to get this measure put on the Oregon ballot for Multnomah County residents. And it was eventually achieved, thereby reducing plastic environmental pollution in Multnomah County. Though I wonder how many more trees were cut down to provide the paper bags the stores were now using. Incidentally, in Ireland, they banned shopping bags except for reusable shopping bags. This drastically reduced that pollution for something you really could just get a reusable bag for. Fewer bags were manufactured overall. But anyway, this was a specific, realistic, achievable, time-based goal. Another example of this would be to change local laws, such as state laws, to allow competition in the home energy market. An idea he discusses in this book is that of the currently legally sanctioned monopolies in the US and other countries, so a solar entrepreneur could come in and hook people up to some new home solar grid for their energy. Several states have already changed laws, as Mr. Nussey says in Freeing Energy, to allow individual homes to run their home on solar panels on their own property to help usher in the necessary change for the health and well-being of our communities to be using cleaner, less polluting energy sources, getting us away from our dependence on dirty fuels like coal that contaminate our environment with toxic metals. Without very specific goals, nothing is ever going to change. Of course, in regards to my example of banning plastic bags, I would like to point out that at the time I said it would actually make more sense to try to work with plastic manufacturing companies to develop either a new kind of plastic that would be biodegradable like cardboard, or to create a new enzyme to break down plastics. Instead, they focused on fighting big plastic, telling the people we talked to door that they were fighting big plastic. I saw them, that environmentalists really like the feeling and persona that they're in a David and Goliath struggle, and they're heroic David trying to take down a giant, rather than simply being practical and doing what might actually be best for society, such as one of my solutions above for the plastics problem, which would help everywhere instead of just reducing plastics in one county of one state in one country in the world. If you had brand new, less polluting plastic technologies or an enzyme to break them down, you could have an effect on all the plastics in the world. And instead of fighting big plastic, the plastics company wouldn't need to, those companies wouldn't need to be fought, because you'd be working with them to help develop these technologies, and their existing infrastructure would help you bring in these new plastic technologies that were less polluting. But instead we have this cave person, primitive, us and them mentality, which is still driving the motivations of even the most contemporary individuals, and it is holding our larger community and our progress back. I also had an idea for what I called a catalytic converter for household sink drain. That basically someone should create a unit that would detoxify our household wastewater somehow before it goes into the sewage system and pollutes the world's water. But again, inventing a technology like that would involve working with captains of industry rather than fighting against them all the time. And getting donations from people like you, just as someone doesn't have to get a job where their employment would be based on producing an actual result. Now, it is 2022, and Miss Thunberg is 19, a young adult. And presently, all she does in her environmental spokesperson work is essentially yell at adults older than herself to do something to make a difference. That in and of itself is having no effect whatsoever, except to show other people her age that supposedly the correct way to behave is to skip school, never get a real job, or have any real responsibilities like a household budget or children to raise, and then yell at your elders and show zero respect for the people that came before you to provide all the modern luxuries that you take for granted. I'm aware that she did eventually go back to school. Some adult at some point invented trains, refrigerators, televisions, air conditioners, smartphones, heaters, and so on. They also created the modern luxury of the modern democracy, forms of which are used in my two home countries of the US and Ireland, and her home country of Sweden, which is one of my ancestral homes along with Ireland and Germany. She shows zero acknowledgement or appreciation for what adults have created, which she benefits from daily. We are all standing on the shoulders of the people that came before us. I think we should all appreciate that, while we also think critically about their limitations and work to do better. For example, George Washington was an amazing, visionary, great man, and I would not have had the blessing of being born in this democratic republic of the US without him, where I have all these civil liberties, especially in this world as a female. I respect that, but I'm also aware that he owned African American human beings as slaves, which is completely wrong. Many people in his time did that, unfortunately, and eventually slavery was abolished in this country, as it should have been. We don't have to hate the man for having some of the limitations of his era. We can respect and appreciate the parts of him in his life's work which were visionary and which we have benefited from. Remember, the U.S. founding this democratic republic inspired people around the world to have these modern democracies where people have these rights. He was a huge part of that. This country would not have been a success without him. Only he could lead this new nation because he didn't want the job. So he wasn't trying to seize power, and that is why it worked. We can acknowledge his good accomplishments, his good work. We can also acknowledge his limitations of his time and not try to gloss over that when we talk about history. And we can appreciate that future generations put an end to those limitations in this country, including that originally men that did not own property and women were not allowed to vote. But future generations improved on the original way this country was run, and we can appreciate that and we can move on. No vitriolic hate speech of our predecessors, of our elders, is needed in this process of growing and doing better. And we do not need to vilify our great men once we have safely benefited from them. With my teenage students, I always say that respect for one's elders is a social contract between the generations. I don't deserve respect just because I'm an adult and I have a certain job title of teacher. I earn respect by how I behave. I come to work every day, I act professionally, I do my job properly, I drive safely on public roads, I pay my taxes into the system to help my community, and so on. I respected my grandma Culleby not because she was older than me, but because she spent her whole life doing for others, starting when she was 14 years old and left school because it was the Great Depression and she had 7 younger siblings to help take care of. And she went and worked as a waitress 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to help provide for her family. Not one person ever had a disrespectful thing to say about my grandmother. Age wasn't why, the way she conducted herself was. Never ran around on her husband or anything like that. She was very respectable. I don't think age or job title is what should get you respect. Respect is something you earn, and that is about how we conduct ourselves. That determines the level of respect that we should get. Respect is earned. But the seeming blind, hateful disrespect of all her elders that Miss Thunberg seems to exhibit is outside of this social contract. She seems to rant at all adults without appreciation for any of them. Of course, I haven't listened to all of her speeches, so perhaps I missed something. I'm usually too busy working at my actual job that contributes something to society and produces an actual result, teaching young people and helping them to gain self-confidence and essential skills, some of which they're going to use on the job market. So I find it odd that she's been raised in a household with parents that apparently didn't teach her anything about manners and respect. I was raised by 2 parents that taught me to have manners. Manners are like the oil in your car engine or the engine of the bus you take in order to not take a car. It keeps everything working together fluidly. Without that oil, without those manners, everything grinds against each other and causes all kinds of irritation and problems. With manners, like with oil in an engine, everything can run smoothly. I actually question her general lack of self-reflection, and it is typical with people who focus on one issue that bothers them and a change that they want made that will benefit them, but they don't look at things that they are doing that actually contribute to the problem. So one can't help but notice that she has very long, very nice hair, and she wears some amount of makeup, or it looks like she does. So from an environmental perspective, this is extremely wasteful and contributes to global pollution. Shampoos and conditioners, for example, are made with various component parts and chemicals, and they're mixed and packaged in factories, and this takes a dirty energy to run these factories' machines to make this. Also, these ingredients, some of them are no doubt trucked in from somewhere, so you've just burned fossil fuels to truck in the supplies. Then, of course, the plastic packaging is bad for the environment. The shampoo is washed into the sewer system, which then pollutes the world's water, and it came in a plastic bottle. Even if you recycle that, recycling plastics takes a great deal of electrical energy, and if that energy came from a grid that's powered by coal, then you just use more dirty fossil fuels in this whole process with your hair care products. If it's coal, heavy metals just went into the breathable air. So from the cosmetics industry, sustainability.yukon.edu states that in the United States, bottles, tubes, and containers used annually in the skincare market have added up to 120 billion units of plastic packaging. I couldn't find statistics for the hair care industry, but then I didn't have much time to look because I work full-time at my job. Yet she continues to have long hair and wear makeup. To be a true environmentalist, shouldn't she cut her hair short and encourage everyone else to do the same in order to reduce all these chemicals getting washed into the water and this use of plastics for the packaging for these hair care products? If 1 billion people who currently have long hair and wear makeup cut their hair short and stop wearing makeup, it would save us billions of tons of pollution annually. But apparently, if it's a needless luxury that she personally likes, then its environmental impact doesn't matter, doesn't exist. It's only if it's a luxury like air travel that she doesn't personally care about that it's a problem for the world. Of course, using a gas-burning vehicle is not a luxury but a necessity for millions of people around the world. Point she and many environmentalists who live in cities with a great deal of public transportation who don't seem to understand or have an awareness of, since it involves thinking out of themselves or doing some actual research. Most people living in rural areas of the world in modernized countries are going to need to use an automobile to get to their jobs, the grocery store, a doctor, a dentist, anywhere. If you live in a big city in Europe, you'll most likely be able to bicycle and or take a public transportation almost anywhere. That was my experience when I lived in Dublin, Ireland. I currently live in Arkansas. Almost nothing in this entire state is accessible unless you have an automobile. And I couldn't afford an electric car on a teacher's salary. Besides, there are no charging stations where I live, and none of the energy grids out here run on renewable energy anyway. We need investment in statewide charging stations in every state, and again, if the energy grid gets its energy from burning coal, we wouldn't have reduced carbon emissions, we would have actually increased them because coal is dirtier than gasoline. According to Scientific America, liquid coal produces more than twice the emissions of regular gasoline. However, this might start reducing pollution if the energy grid got a lot of power from solar, and according to Freeing Energy, we now have the technologies we need to start making this a reality, which is amazing and should make us feel hopeful for the future. So what we really need is specific policy change and even a willingness to let the current big energy companies use their existing infrastructure to transition to cleaner sources of energy, which he says in his book. For example, if Exxon were to start offering solar-powered electric car charging stations at all of their current gas stations, that could make a big impact towards sustainability if they got this electrical energy from solar panels installed on the roofs of their stations, for example, or maybe nearby parking lots. They could put solar panels above them in the cities. I know the environmental movement wants to fight against the big companies, but a much more practical approach would be to use them because they have so much existing infrastructure that stretches out everywhere. At the end of the day, as long as we switch to those renewables and make a cleaner world that is less polluted, that has safer air and so on, it doesn't really matter if they do it for the right reasons or not. It matters that it gets done. and we leave a better world for the next generation to inherit. And the logistics of putting all this in without using existing infrastructures is massive. It would take too long. We need to get these things working now. So these are the kinds of practical realities that those in environmental groups never get into from what I've seen. They just give impassioned speeches, then wait for you to donate money to them, and what results have they actually brought us? Very little, if any. Even in my above example with banning plastic bags in Multnomah County, it probably only became law because there was some politician and or political party that was going to benefit from it by being the anti-plastic candidate that cared about the environment. Normally, that's the only thing that drives changes in laws and policy. And again, as long as these things get done, it doesn't really matter if people did it for the right reason. It matters if we get it done so the younger generations will inherit a better world and we don't just keep repeating our same mistakes and problems as a community. The so-called environmental movement has a great racket for getting your money for a job where they never have to produce an actual result. They'll just keep telling you it's everybody else's fault. The captains of industry, the politicians, big plastic. So they just need more money from you because their fight is great. In fact, they shouldn't be fighting with politicians and captains of industry. They should be working with them to help fund the development of these new technologies and set the political agenda in regards to renewable technologies. One can invent the tech or fund those that do, and the other can change the laws to allow for or force the use of that tech. Environmental activists can't really do much of anything. They can organize protests, but that doesn't produce an actual result. It makes people go, yay, they're doing a thing, but it still doesn't actually produce a result. And if the information in freeing energy is any indication, this change to renewables is probably going to happen regardless of what anyone else is doing, environmental groups or politicians, because entrepreneurs want to make that money, and renewables is a massive global and growing market. In practical terms, Elon Musk has done more for the environmental movement than any career environmentalist ever has. Think about it. I'm not going to comment on his controversial public personality or business practices, mainly because celebrity gossip kills brain cells and is beneath efforts to better humanity. I want us to stop destroying nature and polluting our world. I am all for the goal of breaking our dependence on dirty energy sources. That is why I read books like Freeing Energy and put a great deal of hard work and hours of my time into researching and writing this piece. I want people to ground their efforts for the environment in the real practical world of actual realistic goals and tangible results, because I want for this change to happen, especially for the younger people alive today who have to inherit this world. I highly, highly recommend that you read this book and hold those in power accountable, such as politicians, to specific, realistic, achievable, and time-based goals, less for my future and more for the futures of the next generation so they have the chance to prosper. So thank you so much for watching. That is all I have for you today. And I hope you find what you're looking for.